The flying tank. Why the 42-meter record of the BT-7 remains unbroken to this day. Friends, have you ever wondered if iron can fly? I'm not talking about airplanes, but about a real, brutal 20-ton tank that one day just took off and flew. Sounds like the ravings of a madman or a scene from a science fiction movie, right? But no, it's pure truth. A story that would make any modern designer, military engineer, or even just a World of Tanks fans' eyes pop out of their head. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that will turn everything inside out. A story about how, in 1936, a Soviet BT-7 tank, under the control of a daring madman, Captain Kolchitsky, flew through the air for a full 42 meters. That's almost half a football field, and he did it not thanks to a catapult, an explosion, or some clever ramp. It was the most ordinary combat tank, weighing nearly 14 tons, that simply accelerated, drove up a steep slope by a river, and left the ground. It soared through the air like a huge, roaring bird, and then landed safely right in the water. Can you imagine that moment? You're sitting inside an iron box, the engine roaring so loud it deafens you, speed pushing 50 kilometers per hour, and suddenly the ground disappears from under the tracks. Absolute silence descends, broken only by the whistle of the wind and the frantic pounding of your own heart. You're flying. You're actually flying in a tank, and you realize that in a second, there will be an impact. What will it be like? Deadly or just deafening? Kolchitsky risked everything. His life, his career, his health. And he won. This record, my friends, has stood for almost 90 years. And do you know the scariest secret? No one will ever break it. Not because there are no brave souls, but because modern tanks, those monsters weighing 46 tons, packed with electronics and multi-layered armor, would simply fall apart trying to repeat this stunt. Physics, mother of it, won't allow it. They're too heavy, their suspension is too weak, they're designed for other tasks. Captain Kolchitsky's 42 meters will forever remain in history as an unattainable peak, a challenge that time threw at itself. So, what was this devilish design secret that turned an ordinary fighting vehicle into a flying tank? Why do historians still argue about this record? And how was such a thing even possible in an era when even airplanes were made of wood and fabric? Let's break it down piece by piece. I promise it's going to get intense. Engineering genius or devilish luck? First, let's transport ourselves to that insane, idea-hungry, but great time. The 1930s. The whole world was on the brink of a great war, and the Soviet Union, surrounded by enemies, desperately needed new weapons. Weapons that would be faster, higher, stronger. That's when the concept of the fast tank, or BT, Bystrokodny tank, was born. It was a whole philosophy, mixed with pure adrenaline. Our engineers, like sponges, absorbed everything best the world had to offer, but reworked it with some incredible wild scope. This brings us to the most interesting part, the American connection. You'll be surprised, but our hero, the BT-7, has a father, and he's an American. His name was John Walter Christie, and let me tell you, he was quite a character. A brilliant self-taught engineer, obsessed with the idea of speed on tracks. He invented a suspension that is still considered a masterpiece of engineering. But in America, his ideas were unwanted. Bureaucrats in the U.S. military didn't understand why a light reconnaissance vehicle needed such crazy speed and a complex chassis. They considered him an upstart and a dreamer. And Christie, fed up with it all, started selling his designs abroad. He was willing to work with anyone, just so his creation could see the light of day. And then we entered the game. Soviet intelligence worked perfectly. In 1930, under the guise of purchasing agricultural tractors, can you imagine that spy novel? Moscow acquired several Christie tank samples from him. It was a success. Our engineers, among them geniuses like Alexander Morozov and Mikhail Koshkin, the very same one who would later create the T-34, seized this idea and began refining it, perfecting it. They understood the main thing. The Christie suspension, with its huge vertical coils and springs, wasn't just a way to drive over bumps. It was the key to a fundamentally new tactic. It was a shock absorber capable of absorbing an impact that would destroy any other tank. This is how the BT-2 appeared, then the BT-5, and finally, in 1935, the crowning achievement of the BT-7. This wasn't just a tank. It was a sprinter, a short-distance runner. Its creators consciously made a sacrifice. They made the armor laughably thin, only 10 to 22 millimeters in some places. That was barely enough to protect against rifle bullets and small shrapnel. Any anti-tank rifle or small-caliber gun would pierce it like a tin can. But this was done deliberately. For one thing, for speed and maneuver. They believed that a tank shouldn't expose itself to attack. It should be elusive, appear from nowhere, strike, and disappear in the smoke, leaving the enemy looking foolish. And you know what? They succeeded. The BT-7 could accelerate on the highway to 72 kilometers per hour. For the mid-30s, that was the speed of a racing car. And the secret lay in the machine's heart. Under its hood was a real aviation monster, the M17T engine. It was a licensed copy of the German BMW 6, refined by our brilliant engineer Alexander Mikulin. Imagine, 12 cylinders, displacement of almost 47 liters, and 450 horsepower. With the vehicle's own weight at 13 tons, this gave it a hurricane-like power-to-weight ratio, about 32 to 33 horsepower per ton. Let's do a little economic historical reference so you can grasp the scale. In those same years, the main Wehrmacht tank, the PZ-3, had a power-to-weight ratio of only about 15 horsepower per ton. Our T-26, the main infantry support vehicle, barely managed a pathetic 11 to 12 horsepower. Do you see the difference? The BT-7 was 2.5 times zippier. It was as if today, at a traffic light, a regular sedan was lined up next to a Ferrari. Except this Ferrari weighed as much as a small cargo truck and was armed with a 45mm cannon capable of piercing any armor of the time. This was the genius simplicity of Soviet military thought. Don't try to protect the tank from everything. Give it the ability to avoid being hit and make its own hit deadly. The leap into eternity. How it happened. So, the summer of 1936 arrived. The location, a secret training ground near Moscow, most likely in the Kubinka area or near Medvezhye Ozero. Unusual tests were being prepared. The task set before the driver-mechanic, Captain Kolchitsky, was, let's be blunt, suicidal. Accelerate the 13-ton tank to maximum speed, race up a steep, grassy clay slope, and jump off it into the river. No ramp, no safety net, just a leap into the water like a swallow, but instead of a swallow, a tracked monster. The goal wasn't to set a distance record. The official task sounded boring and mundane, to test the durability of the running gear and hull under extreme dynamic loads. Engineers wanted to understand how the Christie suspension would behave upon impact with water from a great height and speed. But Captain Kolchitsky, judging by everything, was a man with nerves of steel and possibly a touch of madness. He decided to squeeze everything out of the machine. In the days leading up to the jump, rumors spread across the training ground. Tankers, mechanics, engineers, everyone came to look at that fateful slope. They estimated the trajectory, argued, and measured the distance to the water with tape measures. Whispers circulated that Kolchitsky had already said goodbye to his wife and written a will. Some twirled their fingers at their temples. Others clicked their tongues in admiration. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. And then that day arrived. The morning was sunny but windy. A commission of important generals, designers, and journalists from closed military publications gathered on the riverbank. Everyone froze in anticipation. From around the bend, the BT-7 appeared. It approached slowly, the engine chuffing, but upon reaching the long straight leading to the slope, it roared. Kolchitsky followed a practice procedure, but pushed it to the limit. He drove the machine like no one had ever driven it before. First gear, then an instantaneous shift to second. The M17T engine howled at maximum RPM, spewing sparks from the exhaust pipes. The tank, as if sensing freedom, lunged forward. The speedometer needle crept up. 40, 45, 50 kilometers per hour. For a tracked vehicle, this was a crazy sprint. The last 30 meters to the cliff edge were the scariest. The ground under the tracks had turned into a washed-out rut. The tank shook and was thrown from side to side. Kolchitsky held the control levers tight, feeling the vibration in his shoulders. A fraction of a second before takeoff, he slightly turned the machine, lifting its nose, a calculated maneuver to enter the water at the correct angle and avoid nosediving. And then came silence. Not exactly silence, but a sound impossible to describe in words. The engine roar that had been pounding in his ears suddenly became distant, turning into a hum. The whistle of wind through the viewports. The tracks, deprived of support, spun wildly in the air, creating a buzzing sound. Kolchitsky cut the throttle to prevent them from tearing off. All this lasted a few seconds, but for the driver himself, and for everyone on the shore, those seconds stretched into an eternity. The tank was flying. It flew in a steep parabola like a huge steel cannonball. Below, about 5 meters down, the water surface flashed. Impact. It was monstrous. Thousands of liters of water erupted into the air in a fountain as high as a 3-story building. The tank seemed to stop for a second, settling, sinking into the water almost up to its turret. Kolchitsky was thrown forward. Straps dug into his body. Spots swam before his eyes. Later, he said that inside, despite the deafening noise, he heard the metal groan, heard the springs of the suspension creak plaintively as they absorbed the full force of the impact. If not for those springs, if not for Christie's genius, the running gear would have simply crumpled into the hull, crushing the driver-mechanic flat. But the tank survived. The engine, which had stalled for a moment, started again. Water streamed down the armor, and the BT-7, as if nothing had happened, began to climb out onto the opposite bank. The commission, watching from the observation post, was initially speechless, then erupted in cries of "Hurrah!" Someone took off their cap and threw it in the air. Someone hugged their neighbor. The generals exchanged glances. In their minds, plans for new tactical maneuvers were already being born. The engineers rushed to the water to measure the flight distance. And the number they announced stunned everyone. 42 meters. This wasn't just a success. It was a victory of the human spirit over inertia, fear, and gravity. Kolchitsky was pulled from the hatch, pale, soaked in sweat, but happy. He had done it. He had proven that the impossible was possible. Why don't they fly anymore? And here arises the most important question, one that bothers me personally and that I hear from you in the comments. If the BT-7 was so cool if it could fly, then why weren't all the world's tanks made the same way? Why did evolution take a different path? Why are modern Abrams, Leopards, and our beautiful T-90s compared to the BT slow, lumbering turtles? The answer is simple and cruel, like war itself. The experience of Spain, Koch and GOL, and especially the Winter War with Finland revealed a terrible truth. Speed and jumping ability are great, but when artillery hits you from concealed positions, when enemy infantry learns not to fear tanks and lets them get close to throw grenades or Molotov cocktails, then all your speed becomes useless. The thin armor of the BT-7 burned like a match. A hit from even a small caliber shell didn't just crack it. It shattered, showering the crew with fragments of their own armor. Crews nicknamed the BT-7 the Grave for Two. A grim nickname, but accurate. War quickly put everything in its place. The Germans, with their pragmatism, bet on armor and firepower, gradually making their tanks heavier. We, having seen the terrible losses of 37 to 41, also understood a tank must be a universalist. It must be able to withstand fire, not get stuck in mud, and hold shells. Thus the T-34 was born, taking the best from the BT, Christie suspension, powerful engine, and adding fundamentally new, intelligent armor sloped with rational angles, which increased protection without increasing weight. But this doesn't make Captain Kolchitsky's record any less significant. It simply belongs to a different weight class. It showed what engineering thought, unconstrained by dogma, was capable of. And it also showed the limits of that thought. 42 meters is forever. Let's just apply some physics. Take a modern main battle tank. Its weight exceeds 40 to 60 tons. It has a powerful engine, but its power-to-weight ratio is much lower than the BT-7's. To leave the ground from a ramp, you need speed. To achieve that speed in a heavy vehicle, you need a kilometer-long, smooth concrete runway. that doesn't exist in combat conditions. But that's not even the main point. The main point is the suspension. The suspension travel of a modern tank is designed to absorb bumps, potholes, and ruts, but not for free fall from a height. The BT-7's vertical road will travel reached 60 centimeters. That's a colossal amount. Imagine a spring that can compress half a meter, absorbing impact energy. In the T-90 or Abrams, this figure is 2 to 3 times smaller, because their task is to conduct aimed fire on the move, not jump off cliffs. If a monster like the T-90 did attempt a jump of 40 meters, upon landing the suspension would simply collapse like a house of cards, punching through the floor, turning the tank into a pile of scrap metal, and the crew would experience G-forces incompatible with life. So, the BT-7's record remains unbroken not because there are no fools willing to repeat the feat, but because the very concept of the tank has changed. The flying tank turned out to be too vulnerable for real war. But in our memory, in the history of military technology, it remains a bright, dazzling flash, a symbol of an era when it seemed nothing was impossible. The price of speed. We cannot fail to mention the human cost of this success. We often admire numbers, records, engine power, forgetting that living people sat behind the controls. Captain Kulchitsky wasn't just a driver-mechanic. He was an ace of the highest class, cool-headed and calculating. Contemporaries wrote that the day before the jump, he practically didn't drink or eat. And it wasn't just superstition. It was pure physiology and medicine. Upon impact with water, the G-forces are such that internal organs might not withstand it. A full bladder could simply rupture, causing peritonitis. Blood vessels in the eyes and kidneys couldn't withstand the hydraulic shock. It was called red fog. Therefore, tankers preparing for such jumps followed a strict diet. At the moment of the jump, according to his memoirs, Kulchitsky let go of the controls. This was also a calculated risk. If he had held onto them in a death grip, inertia would have torn his arms from their sockets or broken his wrists. He curled up, pressed himself into the seat, trying to become one with this steel machine. Only when the tank touched the water and the speed dropped sharply did he grab the controls again to drive the vehicle onto the shore. This guy, whose name is almost forgotten now, deserves to be remembered. He risked not for glory, not for medals, though I'm sure he received plenty. He risked so that his country would have the best technology in the world. He was a cog in a huge machine, but a golden cog without which the whole mechanism might have fallen apart. Conclusion, lessons from history. What do we have left? The light tank BT-7, born from the intersection of a brilliant American idea and Soviet engineering ambition, achieved the impossible. It gave us a record that will stand forever. 42 meters of flight became a symbol of audacity, courage, and technical perfection. The very things we love about the domestic school of tank building. Yes, its armor was thin. Yes, in 1941, hundreds of them burned, holding back the enemy's advance at the cost of incredible losses. But they fulfilled their mission. They bought time, they provided experience, and they gave us the T-34, which reached Berlin. This story isn't just about a tank. It's about the choices that have to be made in any area of life. What do you choose? Speed or protection? Attack or defense? Risk or caution? The BT-7 chose speed, and it earned its place in history even if at the cost of vulnerability. Modern tanks chose protection and firepower, and that's right for modern combat. But that flight, it will forever remain a reminder that nothing is impossible for a person with a burning heart. What do you think? Is it possible that someday new materials, new suspensions, and new engines will allow a return to the idea of an ultra-fast, maneuverable, and protected tank? Or does the future belong to unmanned, flying platforms, while heavy armor becomes a thing of the past? I'm incredibly interested in your opinion. Let's have a real brainstorming session in the comments. Write whatever you think, argue, prove your point.